Hello, I'm David Breeden. I'm the senior minister at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, a historically humanist congregation, and this is Coffee and Wisdom, when we look at some ideas, theology, philosophy, etc., that have made the nation what it is today, and where we might be going. For the past 3 weeks, we've been talking about a central movement in American Protestantism called the social gospel movement. Now, when that gospel movement began in the 1870s, mainline Protestantism was in the ascendant in the U.S. It appeared that that would be the wave of the future. At the time, it did tend to be a private affair. That is, my religion is over here, my citizenship is over here, and never the twain shall meet. Yes, it was a fiction, but it was the kind of agreed upon idea of how to do things. And of course, when the social gospel movement began, this dapper fellow in the portrait was the model of the minister of the Protestant denomination. Out he goes into the working class poor and pats them on the head, and he's going to help them out. And that was the basic idea of the social gospel and what it looked like at the time. I thought it would be interesting to look at a few of the U.S. presidents during this time period, just to give you an idea about religion and religiosity in the United States in the late 19th century, because it isn't then what it is now. And it's very important to really notice that. We're much more religious in terms of the overtness of religion now than they were in those days. Ulysses S. Grant, for example, who became president in 1869, great war general, and was elected as a great servant of the country, was nominally Methodist, as were many people who lived out on what was then the Western frontier. But he never attended church, and he was irritated when people brought up the subject. So probably not all that religious. Rutherford B. Hayes, who became president in 1877, was a very educated person. He admired Ralph Waldo Emerson and therefore the Transcendentalists, but he was not a Unitarian per se, though he did say this: I find myself using the word Christian, though I am not a subscriber to any creed. I belong to no church, but in a sense, satisfactory to myself and believed by me to be important, I try to be a Christian, or rather, I want to be a Christian and to help do Christian work. So nominally Christian, believes, admires the Transcendentalists, but he doesn't belong to any church. Yeah, Christianity is a great idea, but that's about all that I'm going to engage in that. He goes on to say the religion of the Bible is the best in the world. Again, very typical of the thought of Euro-Americans in those days, that Christianity is going to take over the world because it's a very good idea. I see the infinite value of religion. Let it be always encouraged. A world of superstition and folly have grown up around its forms and ceremonies, but the truth in it is one of the deep sentiments in human nature. Yep, that's exactly what Emerson said, and there you go. Now, James Garfield, who became president in 1881 and was assassinated, was called at the time the preacher president. He was a member of a church, the Disciples of Christ. Those of you who have been following along remember that the Disciples of Christ was one of the mainline religions, Protestant denominations that really bought deeply into the social gospel as it came along. And guess what? They are still very much into that mode today. So he was the preacher president, and he said this: let me urge you to follow him, Jesus, not as the Nazarene, the man of Galilee, the carpenter's son, but as the ever-living spiritual person, full of love and compassion, who will stand by you in life and death and eternity. So more in the line of a more conservative religious idea, but still very much in that idea that Christianity is very good for the country, very good for citizens, etc. This, by the way, is one of the churches that he did preach at, a Disciples of Christ Church that's still there today. Chester Arthur followed him in 1881, and he was a preacher's kid, and he absolutely detested religion. Grover Cleveland, elected in 1885, also was a preacher's kid. He was Presbyterian all of his life, and as many Presbyterians did, he did not talk about it at all. And Benjamin Harrison, 1889, Presbyterian and a lifelong Sunday school teacher. So you see a pattern here. Mainline religions that are very much still with us today, but the ones that are very quickly also declining with time. So until World War I, the rhetoric of the social gospel mirrored mainstream U.S. political rhetoric, and both were center-right and conservative. And then things began to change with the war, as we saw with pacifism being a real football in the day, and then the idea of the modernists. This is a 1920s era cartoon, The Descent of the Modernists. So here they are, they're up there in Christianity, but then they say, oh, okay, the Bible is not infallible after all. And then they say, man not made in God's image. Then they say there's no miracles. Then they say there's no virgin birth. Then they say there's no deity. Then they say there's no atonement, no resurrection, agnosticism, atheism. So the descent of the educated people, and here you see they are ministers going down the path toward atheism. And of course, this then begins to drive a wedge in the U.S. Body politic in terms of religion. In the 1920s, the Scopes Monkey trial, we get the Anti-Evolution League, and then the real split between science and fundamentalist religion begins, and also then a split in the U.S. churches and a split in the U.S. political sides and how these things were arranging themselves. This is a contemporary question that goes right back to that 1920s illustration I just showed you. 5 signs your church might be heading toward progressive Christianity. And by the way, that's a bad idea according to the signs. So be sure that you watch out for these signs so they don't descend into modernism and into atheism. You get the idea. Very much still alive in the U.S. today. So what's going to happen next after we've been looking at this for the past 3 weeks? Well, number one, the hegemony of Euro-American Protestant men is gone for good. That the guy with patting kids on the head is no longer the way American religion looks today. So that's a given. And today, also, there is no political center in the U.S., center-right, center-left, whatever. As a matter of fact, this graph shows you the median Republican political beliefs over here, and the median Democratic beliefs over here, and you see how there's a very steep descent into the valley between the two. So there is no political center at the moment. We have a very big split. Also, the social media rhetoric tends to hyperbolize, demonize, and divide. That's one of the main things that we weren't prepared for when we went into the social media days is what it would do to political rhetoric. We know that now we have the reports of various things happening, and immediate spin happening from both sides. And that's not going to stop. And also, inequality in many forms is growing in the United States. So what's next? Well, this guy definitely out. We've looked before about the sharp decline in Protestantism in the U.S., mainline Protestantism in the U.S., and the liberal religion in general. So we're not going to have that guy anymore. The future of religion in America looks a whole lot more like this photo. Many different faiths banding together, many different colors of people, many people from many different places banding together, or not. And that, of course, is the question. Do we achieve this? Because this then would be a more holistic look at what religious life is in America today. So I would say band together, including all faiths and humanists, which at the moment is kind of not all that acceptable, unfortunately. Also, use technology to target specific and immediate challenges. We at First Unitarian Society have something we call Active Voices. It is a member-led group that targets specific problems right now and then calls postcards, letters, etc. Very, very targeted for immediate kinds of things. And we can do that now with, again, social media. It gives and it takes. The Minnesota Council of Churches is remember, one of the outgrowths of the very beginnings of the social gospel movement, started in 1908, named the Council of Churches in 1950, nationwide. The Minnesota one very recently came out with this statement, which is interesting and I think leads us into the future. They say this: Truth and Reparations is an ambitious 10-year project approved by the MCC board in October of 2020. The vision includes truth and reconciliation commissions, diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and congregations, and reparations to BIPOC communities for the harm done by white supremacy in Minnesota. And these ideas are happening all over the country at the moment, and we will see what this leads to. And it is, as you see, a 10-year project. The thing about the Minnesota Council of Churches is that it is still a Christian organization, and non-Christian groups at the moment can't join, but I suspect that will definitely change. I happen to belong to a group called the Downtown Minneapolis Interfaith Senior Clergy. We recently wrote a letter called Join Us on the Road to Abundance. I won't read that to you. It's out there. But what I want to show you is who it's signed by. And for us anyway, number one, we try to be multi-faith. So we have an imam, a rabbi, then yes, there's a Presbyterian. There's us, First Unitarian Society. First Covenant Church is the only evangelical group, but we also have Catholic groups involved in the group nowadays. And of course, then the old mainline suspects along the way, Disciples of Christ, Lutherans, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the way things are headed, I believe, in the days to come. As religion shrinks, I hope that the religious traditions will accept more and more secular people, especially people who do have a label that they are parts of groups that can be mobilized for the social good of our society. And finally, hybrid congregations are here to stay, meaning that geography is shrinking and going away as part of where you can belong to a congregation. So indeed, you can be a humanist and a member of the American Humanist Association or First Unitarian Society for that matter, no matter where you live in the world. Well, that's the discussion for the social gospel. I hope it's been somewhat clarifying and useful. It's an important movement, and it's one of the reasons for the sharp decline in mainline Protestantism. And that's something to think about when we think about politics and the social life of the U.S. Join us tomorrow night, Wednesday night, Bibles and Beer, a humanist Bible study. How many animals on that boat? We're going to be looking at the Noah story tomorrow night. Genesis 6, chapter 6 is where it begins. And we will quickly see that there are two stories that are not exactly fitted together very well. And yes, indeed, there are different numbers of animals on that boat according to which chapter of Genesis that you're reading. Also, a little out of our norm, but this year, because of COVID and travel problems, et cetera, we are going to have a Christmas Eve service at First Unitarian Society. That's online, Thursday, December 24th at 5 p.m. Some music of the seasons, a few words, and lighting some candles. So join us for that. Thank you so much for joining in, and I wish you a happy holiday season, and we will be back after the first of the year with more coffee and wisdom. Thank you.